the legal climbs, were they aware you had did the 2 illegal climbs previously?
Yeah.
Oh, and they still gave you permission?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah. At that time, everything was much less sensitive. Everything was much less sensitive until 2015, when I had the beginnings of a public debate with who is regarded as the leading Egyptian Egyptologist, Zahi Hawass. And unfortunately, in that debate, Zahi, it's actually on YouTube, bits of it, because there was a member of the audience present. Zahi massively lost his temper and stormed out. And then...
So you won.
Then I don't know, but the debate didn't happen. Then I gave a talk. He sat sulking outside. Then he came back, gave his talk. Then the audience asked questions. And again, bits of this were filmed. And one of the audience asked him if he knew about a site called Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is probably the most important archaeological site in the world at the moment. And Zahi said that he didn't know anything about it at all, and that was on camera. So unfortunately, the man is actually enormously knowledgeable about ancient Egypt, but unfortunately, he came across looking not very good. And ever since then, my relationship with him, which had been okay until 2015, has been extremely negative. And when the Egyptian government are approached for filming permission, which these days is done through the Tourism and Antiquities Permission, when they're approached for filming permission, Zahi's the guy they go to and say, is it okay for these people to come in and film? So I'm
Gotcha. So
speculating
if you have beef
slightly,
with him, then it's not going to happen.
It's difficult.
And I understand the defensiveness, because when you wrap your cultural identity around something or creating something as majestic as the pyramids, feeling as if that's like being ripped away from you can really make you feel as if your identity is being taken from you.
And to be clear, I would never wish to divorce the Great Pyramids from the ancient Egyptians. There are a lot of wrong ideas about what I think about this.
Okay, please clarify, because I'm a little hazy on it.
The clarification is this. It's complicated, all right? But inside the Great Pyramid, there are 4 very narrow shafts which point up at the sky. 2 of them point north and south from the so-called King's Chamber. I say so-called because no burial was ever found in it. Yeah. There was a sarcophagus found in it. It's still there, but they had to build the chamber around it. They couldn't bring it up in a funeral ceremony. It's too big to get through the corridor. So 2 shafts point north and south, and they do actually exit on the outside of the body of the pyramid. And back in the 19th century, explorers climbed up there. There they go. You're looking at the King's Chamber South, King's Chamber North, and both of those, you could roll cannonballs down them from the outside, and they would turn up in the King's Chamber. But the shafts of the Queen's Chamber are more complicated. Until, I believe it was 1872, nobody knew they were there. The inner wall of the Queen's Chamber was completely smooth, but there was actually he was a Freemason called John Wayneman Dixon, who had explored the King's Chamber, and he figured, look, there's shafts in the King's Chamber, maybe there's shafts in the Queen's Chamber. And he went around knocking on the walls, and he found 2 hollow points, and he broke those through. You could do that in 1872. And lo and behold, they opened up into these 2 shafts, which go horizontally at first and then point up at the sky. They do not exit on the outside of the pyramid. They're very, very mysterious. The thing is that the angle of those shafts points to significant stars, 4 significant stars, in the period in which Egyptologists believe that the Great Pyramid was built. Archaeoastronomy, which is a universal language, one of them is the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt. And the constellation of Orion was identified with the god Osiris. He was seen as the celestial image of the god Osiris. So having a shaft pointing at the belt of Orion or Osiris makes perfect sense. And others point at 2 of the 2 northern shafts point at 2 of the circumpolar stars. I forget exactly which ones now. And again, they point at them in the era when the pyramids were built, because the positions of stars in the sky change very slowly down the ages. So from an archaeoastronomical point of view, it would be absurd to disconnect the Great Pyramid entirely from the ancient Egyptians. But there's a problem. And that problem is the ground pattern of the 3 Great Pyramids and their relationship to, it's not an accident that Orion's belt has 3 stars and that the Great Pyramids are 3, and that they are positioned on the ground, anybody can see it, in a pattern that looks very similar to Orion's belt. It's like a painter has got his easel in front of him and his canvas, and he's looking up at the sky and he's painting on the canvas the 3 stars of Orion's belt, and then he lowers that canvas down to his feet, and that's what you have on the ground at Giza.
It's that perfect.
It's that perfect, but it's only perfect 12,500 years ago, roughly 12,000. Let's say a round figure, 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
These changes in the sky are actually caused by a motion of the Earth itself. It's a very slow motion. It's a cycle. It takes 25,920 years to complete, the pattern of the stars on the ground and the stars in the sky and the pyramids on the ground and their relationship to the Nile River and the Milky Way locks perfectly
At 12,000.
about 12,000 years ago, not on a single day, but over an epoch of about 1,000 years, and then
Right.
it gradually shifts out, because this is a very, very slow change that takes place. So you have the ground saying 12,500 years ago, and you have the shaft saying 4,500 years ago.
So one might assume that those shafts were maybe carved out at a different time, potentially?
Well, yes. The way I look at it is, I think the site was sacred more than 12,000 years ago.
Right.
I think ground platforms were created there. It's important to remember the Great Pyramid is already built around a natural hill. The first 30 feet inside the Great Pyramid is a natural mound, and there are traditions in ancient Egypt of the primeval mound. And if you enter the Great Pyramid, and you may or may not have been able to do that when you went there.
I went in.
Did you get down to the subterranean chamber?
I think everything was. Oh no, we did. The subterranean was much bigger.
Was it a very rough-hewn chamber cut out of solid bedrock, or was it a built chamber?
There's the built one that we saw. Is it called a sarcophagus? No.
Yes, that's the King's Chamber.
We went to the King's Chamber,
Yeah.
but I believe that there was another one. I can't remember.
You can see that on the screen there. You can see the subterranean chamber. You see the entrance in the north face.
Yep. No, I don't think we went that far.
And then
we went to.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's about 100 feet vertically beneath the base of the Great Pyramid.
Wow.
And it's about 600 feet beneath the apex of the Great Pyramid.
Wow.
And it's cut out of solid bedrock. And my view is, and it's only a theory, and I don't claim that I'm correct, it's just put this forward for thought, is that the original sacred site on the Giza Plateau was that natural primeval mound beneath which the ancients hewed out this enormous subterranean chamber, which is it looks like a rough, unfinished chamber, but it has curious acoustic effects. Which are in themselves very interesting.
This humming that people talk about.
Yeah. It's an amazing place to be, and actually you get a resonance. We tried an experiment with an opera singer up in the King's Chamber. You could hear her down in the subterranean chamber, which is quite remarkable in itself. But I think that was the original sacred site. I think the ground platforms were put in position, and I think the ancient Egyptians finished off the job in a brilliant way. Overbuilding and commemorating and memorizing a site of enormous significance and importance to them.
Sorry, when you say finished off, I'm dumb, so I'm going to ask dumb questions. When you say finished off, what exactly do you theorize?
I think the vast majority of the Great Pyramids as we see them today were the work of the ancient Egyptians.
Okay, got
But
it.
I think they were building on a prehistoric foundation.
Okay.
And it had been sacred for
So your point is
thousands and
not
thousands.
to take away from what ancient. You think they built most of it. You think we're just discounting that there might have been people here 12,500 years ago that also built something.
Correct, because that runs against the archaeological mainstream, and this is where you get into issues of geology and the issue of the Great Sphinx. Because I think, again, it's just my theory. I don't claim I'm 100% right, and everybody's got to listen to me and tell the Egyptologists to go away. Just my view is that on the Giza Plateau were the three massive ground platforms of the three Great Pyramids, the subterranean chamber beneath what is now the Great Pyramid, the megalithic temples, the so-called Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple right beside the Sphinx, and the so-called mortuary temples. These are all megalithic that stand beside the Great Pyramids.
Those are the three little ones that are next to them?
Those are the so-called satellite pyramids.
Okay.
But there are megalithic temples. When I say megalithic, you're looking at structures where the largest single block weighs 200 tons. These are gigantic.
Wow.
Gigantic blocks of stone, but of particular interest, right in front of the Great Sphinx is an almost completely ruined one, and then just to the south of the Great Sphinx is a rather intact one called the Valley Temple. And this temple is again, bears evidence of being built in 2 stages. Because when you look at it, you see that its core is made of limestone, enormous limestone blocks in the range of 50 to 100 tons each, maybe more.
You can bring this up, Mark?
In the one on the left, you can see the limestone blocks up at the top. That's the original structure. And I and my colleagues, and particularly Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University, who is a geologist, are of the view that the ancient Egyptians renovated a far more ancient limestone temple. So you can see the weathering on the limestone temple, and then you can see the granite blocks that were added by the ancient Egyptians. And the puzzle of those blocks is that they are carefully cut to fit around the weathering in the limestone core blocks. So they were respecting those limestone core blocks. They weren't demolishing them. It would be easy just to cut them flat, you know, if you're going to do this, but no, they didn't. They carefully cut each granite block so it would fit around the weathering patterns.
We'd only do that if you thought that a place was sacred.
You felt it was special, and you were trying to preserve it. Likewise, the Sphinx. Again, I need to pay tribute to others. I need to pay tribute to John Anthony West, who was an independent Egyptologist, brilliant man, dear friend of mine.
Rest in peace, right?
Yes, passed away in 2018. He used to call academics quackademics. He was a master of vitriol, and he was the first to draw attention to the possibility that the Great Sphinx may also be a multi-phase monument, not just a monument built in the 4th dynasty, 2500 BC or whatever. He pointed out that there seemed to be very strange erosion patterns. They're harder to see on the
fissures.
body.
There might be on the walls.
But on the surrounding trench, they're much easier to see. And then he brought Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University, who is a geologist, and Schoch agreed that what we're looking at here in the fissures around the side of the Great Sphinx, and to some extent on the body of the Sphinx, is what's called precipitation-induced weathering. It's not a flood. It's weathering that's caused by exposure to a very long period of heavy rainfall.
Right.
And then you have to get into paleoclimatology. When did it rain on the Giza Plateau enough to cause this level of exposure and weathering? You can see the outer trench. The Great Sphinx is cut out of solid bedrock. They created a trench around its body, and the core body was left in place. I and my colleagues think that core body goes back 12,000 plus years. It was originally in the form entirely of a lion with a massive leonine head. But then, by the time that the dynastic period of ancient Egypt came along, the Great Sphinx was very damaged, particularly its head jutting up above the plateau. And we suggest that at that time, the head of the Great Sphinx was recarved into a human head wearing a classic Nemes headdress of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh.
Can you bring up quickly the Sphinx that is covered up to its neck in sand? So this is what the ancient Egyptians probably were looking at, right?
They were looking at a monument cover, like that.
I mean, this is
there's many times during its history when that's all there was, you know. That was the bit that got damaged, and we think back 4,500 years ago, 2,500 BC, it was like that then too, but it was a lion head, and it was very damaged, and they felt they're going to recarve it into a human head, and it is out of proportion with the rest of the body.
Which again does give credit to the Egyptians. I'm just trying to cozy you up to the Egyptian government here.
We want you back in.
Also, the Hebrews are okay with this?
I think the ancient Egyptians massively venerated this site from the beginning. It was the place of the beginning. It was the place of the first time. A time that they called Zeb Tepi. And I think their project was to honor and memorialize it. And then this is where we get into spooky areas which the Egyptologists don't like, which is I'm suggesting that a body of knowledge was down within ancient Egyptian culture, and that a certain moment came when it was decided to turn the Giza Plateau back on again, and that body of knowledge was manifested in the construction of the Great Pyramids. It's very peculiar that the quality of workmanship on the Great Pyramid, and indeed on the other 2 pyramids at Giza, is extremely high. But go a generation later, 2 generations later, to the 5th dynasty, go to the pyramid of Unas at Saqqara, where the so-called pyramid texts are inscribed inside the so-called tomb chamber. And that pyramid, the exterior of it is a mess. It's very poorly built. It's very poorly constructed. You know, you look at it, it just looks like a heap of stones, whereas the Great Pyramid today is still a majestic structure. So it's as though they put everything they had into
try to replicate it, but they just
try to replicate. And then a generation or two later,
this
they
one
could.
here,
That's
right?
the pyramid of Unas.
Yeah.
You know?
What if it's just like the Knicks, where like the father did a really good job, and then the next generation just really fucked the whole thing up?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but it's
Pointless
it's
shots on my team. Like he is.
No, it's a fair point. You know, I mean, human societies go up and down, and that can happen. But that's my view also with the idea of a lost civilization, that we can have an apex and they can fall into a slump and they can come out again. But is knowledge preserved and passed down through the ages? Yes, I think it is.
Now,